Shalom, brothers and sisters.
Shalom, Aki. I can't hear.
Give me 1 second. All right, cool. So, brother, take over the mic. I'm going to mute. You can speak on yours. All right, shalom.
Shalom Aleichem Mishpacha. I'm Brother Henok. I'm from Memphis, Tennessee. I've been in this way of life since I was 11 years old. I'm 42 now, and I started out, in humble beginnings as far as this is concerned. When my father introduced me to the truth, and that was around when I was about 9 or 10, but I didn't accept it until I was 11. And I went from studying both the Hebrew Bible and the Christian Bible into evolving and separating myself away from the Christian Bible once I found and figured out that it isn't the word of the Most High at all in any way, form, or fashion, even though the group that I started out with, they recognized only certain prophecies out of that book, which they said that the so-called New Testament had borrowed or plagiarized from the Hebrew Bible. However, that's my story. I am in the process of building a community that is more, I'll say, culturally sound as far as actually putting in the work and establishing real segments of society outside of the temples. But I'll speak more about that later. All right, Moreh Yeshiah.
All right. Giving honor and praise unto the Most High, the Creator, the Maker of heaven and earth. We are going to start off, brothers and sisters, elders, and everybody else included, by going over a PowerPoint that was agreed upon between the brother Henok and myself. Now, I've been in this understanding, thinking the Most High since I was a baby, also now 42 years old. And the brother Henok is a little couple of hours older than me because we share the same birth date in March of 1980, which also correlates, for those who knew the calendar, Adar the 17th. That's when my Hebrew birthday is, Adar the 17th. And what we want to go over in this is about 24 slides. We're going to ask you all to get your pens, your paper, your pads, whatever your hand uses to write things out, and get this information, brothers and sisters. Coming to you free of charge. However, donations are accepted. If you ever hear me teach on Shabbat, you don't even hear the word donation come out of my mouth. But at the same token, we do want to do this for the people, from us in the spirit of the Most High. Let us pull up the PowerPoint and then move on in this particular case. All right? So let's look. We have here current slide. Now, brother, what I'm going to have to ask of you is, um, when you speak, I mute my mic, and vice versa, so that way any background noise won't be going in when one or the other is speaking. All right. So I'm going to mute my mic, and then you speak, and then we'll go through slide by slide as that, and we'll bounce off of each other saying, "Okay, brother, now you Yeshaya," and vice versa. All right. So I'm gonna mute mine, and then we make that move from there.
All right. Shalom, shalom. Giving honor to the Most High Yah. One of the subject matters that is causing a lot of confusion in this community is that 12 tribes chart. So ever since let's see, I think back in the 90s, I first viewed that chart because one of my brothers, one of my siblings, went to New York and brought like one of those flyers. They had the 12 tribes chart on there from the Israeli Church of Universal Practical Knowledge. And at that time, I was really feeding, into whatever I could find. And I thought that it was legit at the time without any research regarding it. So years later, I viewed that chart again because I pretty much stopped studying it or whatever and going through the verses and things of that nature that was on that flyer. But after after calling myself, reading the flyer again or reading the information because it kept coming up on Facebook, Instagram, and even Twitter. So I decided to look back into the chart. And once I looked back into the chart, I noticed that that chart doesn't say anything regarding the Israelites who are still in Africa, some who are in India, some who are in so-called Middle Eastern, or I'll say Northeast African Edenic countries. It doesn't say anything to look it up, researched it, and I found out that that chart was put together just to incorporate other people into the mix. And when they put other people in the mix, that'll help them to grow their organizations. And then once they did that, they took like pretty much anybody who they considered non-white, so to speak. I mean, people who are considered, like Hispanic, Native Americans, things of that nature. But they misinterpret the scriptures regarding the 10 lost tribes, so to speak, which the 10 lost tribes were not mentioned anywhere in the Americas because the scriptures specifically tells us where they are or where they're located. Moray. Moray has more. Moray has some information on this as well.
Okay,
I'm gonna hand it over to the Moray.
okay. All right, my brother. Toda Rabah for that. Um, if the brother got disconnected, I guess he can, as before, come back in. And we're going to continue, brothers and sisters, in this vein. All right. Shalom. Giving honor to the Most High. This presentation is brought to you by brothers Henok and Yeshiah. The point is to address the matter of idolatry and the matter of the chart that circulates in Israel about the tribes of Israel. And what we want to discuss, brothers and sisters, as pointed out, is the fact that, and it's not to be offensive to anyone, But the fact that in many cases the chart has caused confusion among some people. What the chart, and I say this in due respect, does not identify is the people that are, as pointed out in other parts of the world, in many cases that are also of the house of Israel. What the chart basically would have one to think is that the southern kingdom that was composed, say, of Judah, Levi, and Benjamin, were the people that was brought over here to the Western Hemisphere via the Atlantic slave trade, and that the said northern kingdom that was taken into Assyria came over here to the Americas prior to the dating of the transatlantic slave trade. While those who do study do acknowledge and know that there were Israelites from one end of the earth to the other by the scattering, the chart that is presented in many cases to people does not address such matters. So, again, brothers and sisters, without offending or disrespecting, we want to present the matter as such. All right? Wait for the brother to come back into the said chat. And let's read this here. We want to point out that the references of there being a people called Israel, Israelite, we know ite is a suffix, come from the Assyrians, Babylonians, Persians, and even Romans. From Tiglath-Pileser III to Nebuchadnezzar to Cyrus to Tacitus, there are references of the Israelites. So, brothers and sisters, real quick, Tiglath-Pileser was the Assyrian king that took Israelites that was in the northern kingdom into captivity. Nebuchadnezzar was the one that conquered Jerusalem, brothers and sisters, in the 6th century BCE. Cyrus is the one who conquered Babylon less than 100 years after Nebuchadnezzar conquered Jerusalem and sent many of the people back into their land. And Tacitus was a Roman historian that spoke upon the people of the Israelites. So, brothers and sisters, this is something without any further ado we'd like to continue and get into. Thank you. We have basically drenched the matter of the Meneptah stele and the matter of the Hebrews mentioned in the Amarna records. Nonetheless, the evidence of a people called Israel is not a hoax. All right, so let us go on, if you will, brothers and sisters, to the next slide. And it says this: the identity of the people referred to as Israel has been debated for some time now. It is the general stance among Israelites that from the era of the Greek and Roman hegemony over the lands of the East, the Israelites migrated to Western Africa. One source is that of Eldad the Danite, recorded by Rudolf Windsor, in which he said that there were tribes of Israel that migrated to parts of Africa. So, right there, brothers and sisters, we see about a citation that Rudolf Windsor made concerning Eldad the Danite. Eldad the Danite lived in the 10th century CE or the 10th century AD. All right. And then what he spoke about was concerning at least 8 of the tribes of Israel that wound up migrating into Africa. The guy who wrote the book, The 13th Tribe, which addresses the matter of the Khazars, he attempted in his book to kind of, in layman terms of today, bash the findings and the records and the teaching of Eldad the Danites by saying it is dubious and all those kind of things. So while the guy who wrote the book, The 13th Tribe, Arthur Koestler, acknowledges that the Europeans that you see in places in New York, such as Crown Heights and everything like that, are not the lineal descendants of the ancient Israelites. What is still not addressed, brothers and sisters, is who the true Israelites are in his particular book. It is said by the Beta Israel from Ethiopia that there are Israelites in Syria, China, and America. Now, brothers and sisters, this is not to be funny or anything of that sort. In the book that I wrote, From Assyria to America, I want to, in due respect, if we will, take out the time to show part of it as we see it right here, brothers and sisters. All right, From Assyria to America. You can get this book online. And in this book, one of the things that I spoke upon is this here, which you see, a guy named Adisu Musala. And he was noted for saying, all right, that the Beta Yisrael thought all the Jews in the world were black. So now, if they have what they refer to as the Symbatian River, brothers and sisters, and it says that the Israelites in part are placed not only in Ethiopia, but Syria, China, and America. And if they felt that, for the lack of a better term, the Jews were all black, then who were they talking about being these scattered tribes of Israel in America, Syria, and China, where there are still people that you will call black of today? So just want to point that out for edification purposes. All right. I'm going to go back in here, see if our brother has come back on, add to the stream. Cool. I'm going to mute my mic, and so he can begin to talk on the Shabbat. Shalom. Aki, 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 we cannot hear what you just said because on your end, your mic is mute. So even if I unmuted you, you still got to unmute yourself. So I'm going to have to ask you to go over everything you just said. All right, shalom.
Okay. Shalom, shalom. All right. So we have a Shabbat issue in the community that needs to be seriously addressed. But because of all the confusion of the various doctrines, there's no conclusion to the matter. So like Shabbat is observed all over the world, and it's been observed the same way for centuries. I like to use the Ethiopian calendar here to show, for example, that there are 7 days in a week. If you want to go back and do the research or the homework, you have the ancient Babylonian calendar. You have the it's mentioned in Rudolf Windsor's book, from Babylon to Timbuktu. Like when you go to the secular history and you look at it, you have the Babylonian calendar, you have the Syriac calendar, you even have a Coptic calendar, and they all have 7 day weeks. Shabbat is a seventh day a week event that takes place every week, the last day of the week. It doesn't matter if it says Sunday through Saturday. It doesn't matter if it says Monday through Sunday. It doesn't matter if it says Tuesday, through what have you. It doesn't matter. Because when you compare like this Ethiopian calendar, it has 7 days. And the Beta Israel and the Ethiopian church, okay, which the Beta Israel's practice is known to be like a 2nd century temple practice of our Torah. Hallelujah. So they've also observed Shabbat on a so-called Saturday because it's on the 7th day of the week. On the Ethiopian calendar, you have the Syriac calendar. They have 7 days. Is observed still on Shabbat. On the 7th day. Shabbat doesn't matter what the name of the calendar. The days are of the week. But I like to use the Beta Israel as a prime example, or my precursor, so to speak, because their tradition and their practices are more ancient than contemporary Judaism or world Jewry. So if they observed Shabbat, if they stop working, doing all kinds of activities by sundown, and I mind you, they've been doing this for centuries, okay? And they chill out, they cut everything out, all busy activities. And then once Shabbat, the 7th day, when the sun rises, then they go to their services and do their thing. That tells me, since they've been doing this for centuries, that, logically, I posit that this is legit. Not observing Shabbat on a Wednesday just because you find it in the Dead Sea Scrolls or Pseudepigrapha, like in the Book of Jubilees, in the Book of Enoch. You see a 364-day solar calendar. As a matter of fact, if I'm not mistaken, in the Book of Enoch, it went on to say 365 days. However, it says solar calendar, but the Hebrew calendar is pretty much a lunar solar calendar. Lunar for the months, solar for the years. So that creates a balance in the calendar. And that being the case, that balance in the calendar creates an accurate seasonal precursor for our high holy days, for Shabbat and things of that nature. Do we have another slide like the Syriac calendar, my brother? All right. Now this right here is the Gregorian calendar. As you can see, once again, you have 7 days in a week, but they still use their own names for the days of the week. We don't have names like this in our culture for the days of the week. So we use numbers. But again, this is the Gregorian calendar with 7 days. These 7 days, okay? So when we go to our high holy days, right? Let's say someone may know nothing about the Hebrew calendar at all, or what is known as the Jewish calendar. Usually these types of calendars will still show you which day a high holy day is on. It doesn't have to be specifically the Jewish calendar is if you don't have one, because these calendars here will also show you when the high holy days are. It'll show you when Passover begins, when it ends. It'll show you the same with Shavuot. It'll show you the same thing with Yom Kippur and other holy days. And then we have also another calendar. Can you slide for me, Aki? So this is the Hebrew calendar. And you still have, again, 7 days. And these 7 days you can find in other calendars. Some calendars are more accurate than others. Some of them are not, but they all contain 7 days, and they all contain the Shabbat. You have a Spanish calendar or a Mexican calendar or what have you. You'll see Sabado where Saturday is. But I just want to stress that we cannot trump what's already been practiced for centuries over something that is new. We have too much confusion in the community as it is. And this calendar issue is a huge one, because how can we all be on the same accord if we don't share the same exact calendar? That's all I got to say about that, my brother.
All right, that I key, giving honor and praise unto the Most High, the creator and the maker of heaven and earth. I would like to go over a particular matter, if we will, concerning this. If you look at what is referred to, and we want to show this if we can, right? With the laser pointer, Saturday, Shabbat. Now, the first Shabbat that was created was in Genesis chapter 2. The one who kept the Shabbat ultimately was the Most High. See, sometimes Israelites ask, well, the Shabbat was given to Israel after we left up out of Egypt. But the Shabbat was already known from the era of the book of Genesis. Because you have what you call Yom Rishon, first day, Yom Sheni, second day, Yom Shalishi, the third day, Yom Rebi'i, the fourth day, Yom Kamishi, the fifth day, Yom Shishi, the sixth day, Yom Shabi'i, which is the same as the Shabbat. Now, the word Yom means day or time. That's another thing we want to point out for reasonable purposes. While some do what they refer to as a lunar Sabbath, Luna meaning of the moon, which is the light to rule in Genesis chapter 1, the nighttime, was created in its fourth day of creation, of everything being created. What we know as the Labana, the moon, or the Yareach, said by some as the moon, was created on the fourth day, which means that the first Shabbat was 3 days after the moon's creation. 3 days after the first creation of the moon, you get the Shabbat. So how then, if it's a weekly event, because we want to point out that the word Shebuah, and I'm going to type this into the thing here, brothers and sisters, right? Shebuah, right, means week. Now, the word Shabbat means 7. So linguistically, you have the sheen, the bet, and the ayin, Shabbat, meaning 7, which is also the same Hebrew word for oath or swearing, but that's a whole other matter. Then you form the word Shabbat, meaning 7. You get the word Shebuah, meaning week. Week. Not weak as in the word kalash, as if not strong. That's a different week. But I just want to point that out. All right. Now, looking at it like that, we are sometimes said, or sometimes it's said to us, that one in lunar Sabbath tells when the Sabbath is by the sighting of the moon. So they'll say it's the 8th, the 15th, the 22nd, and the 29th of each of the Hebrew months. But this is no disrespect. There's two things to point out about that. If the Shabbat that we're talking about in Exodus chapter 16 and in Exodus chapter 20 is a weekly event, and the moon determines the matter of months, how would you tell by counting by a monthly count what to do weekly? So you have daily, weekly, monthly, yearly. So let's look at this calendar right here that we see on the slide. That is a monthly count. Why will I look at a monthly count to find out what to do hourly? Some people get paid hourly. I will not look at a monthly calendar as we see here to find out what I do on a specific hour. I will look on an hourly count to find out what to do for a particular hour. The word hour, by the way, is Hour, which is the Hebrew word sha'ah. So looking at it like that, I will have to look, brothers and sisters, at a weekly counting to find out what to do for a weekly event. So therefore, lunar Sabbath, for one, doesn't work for that. Secondly, brothers and sisters, when you go to Leviticus, the 23rd chapter, it says concerning the timing of Shavuot or Chag Shavuot, which is the Feast of Weeks, brothers and sisters. What it tells us to do is that we are to count 7 complete weeks. Complete means you can't start from the middle of that week. You have to start from the first day for something to be tamim or perfect in the first place. So Deuteronomy chapter 16, verse 9 says, when you put the sickle to the standing corn, you take that, the priest offers it the day after the Shabbat, then you start counting from the harvest that was there. And on that 50th day, that is when you have Chag Shavuot. But if you're going, and that's 49, 50 days, and new moon is every 28 to 30 days, that counting for Shavuot, what some call the counting of the Omar, is going to sit there and come to a problem. So therefore, lunar Sabbath counting, which does not work by time-wise or Torah-wise, we just want to point that out for edification purposes. All right, so we're going to continue on with the next slide. Henok or Hanok, which is like Enoch, correct me if I'm wrong, means educated, and Yeshiah, myself, and our predecessors. Now, why did I put that? We do not want to, in our 40s, attempt to come off as if we did something that was already not set in by our elders over from this date in 2022, over a century ago. The place that you see there dates to the 1919 era that you see right there in New York. Now, as you know, the style of dress that they had was very much up to those days and times. When you watch, for instance, real quick, the movie Malcolm X in the 1920s, they was dressing in a certain way. They had a certain style about how they presented themselves, especially as a man and especially as a woman, because you wanted the children to see you in a certain light. Now, looking at this on the left-hand side, Brother Henok and Brother Yeshiah speak on the 12 tribe charts, the Sabbath, and the idols of the house of Israel. We have already covered the matter concerning the Sabbath and the Shabbat. I, looking at some of the brothers' posts on Facebook, inboxed him and asked him, will he be willing to come on the channel to speak upon certain matters, which by him agreeing to it, thinking the Most High, we're here now. We asked the people to subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you. Oh, by the way, what you're seeing there on this side right here takes you back to the era of Rabbi Ford, Rabbi Matthew era. So we're talking over 100 years ago from this date where we are now. I'm going to relinquish the mic in case if the brother want to say something concerning this. We're bouncing back and forth off of each other. So thank you for bearing with us as we do it in that particular manner. Thank you. So I'm going to mute my mic and then
All right. So more Zionist temple. Now, if I'm not mistaken about this community here, one of our predecessors, they, from what I've read on some academic website, what's called academia.edu, they had mentioned that the Moorish Science Temple of America basically originated from out of here, as far as Noble Drew Ali and his, I think his aunt or whoever, and his uncle. However, when when I had first learned about the Moorish Zionist temple, I was amazed by it because I'm like, what? They used Moors or Moorish, you know? So that's when I decided to research that matter, and I found that they practiced, traditional Judaism. Obviously, since they have Moorish in the title, they practice. I would assume they would have practiced like Sephardic Judaism over the Ashkenazi rite. But for them to use Moorish implies that they were, they recognized that we are a part of the Moorish Empire, or that we were descendants of those Moors from the Judaic sense who were expelled from out of Spain or España or Al Andalus. But yeah, that's all I can say about that. I do like the talit, the guy, that the Rabbi was wearing. It's pretty nice. However, I'm gonna relinquish this. I meant to say this as well. You see the Magen David, right? Now our ancestors used the Magen David, and they use it as a Judaic identity form of identity or symbolism as well, because like back in that time, they called themselves Jews. Hebrew Israelite, their phrase wasn't coined until a little like sometime later. However, that symbol, the Magen David, was discovered by an archaeologist back in let's see what they call it, that site Bar Karkum or Beit Harkum, amongst Israelite artifacts. I would share the book, but it's downstairs in my library. But I relinquished the mic.
All right, my brother. Thank you for that. I wanted to show, and giving due respect, when the brother mentioned the talit, um, I want to show with the laser pointer what it is. The elder whom you see there with the what some may consider a shawl or whatever, but this is a masculine matter, and this is called a talit. In many cases, it was worn with fringes attached to it and so forth. So I just wanted to show with the laser pointer what that was. We also notice, brothers and sisters, that the Hebrew writing is on the side in this particular case. And we see 127 West 137th. That is in Harlem of today, which is in New York City. All right. So this is something we want to point out in this particular matter. Now, regarding say the term Hebrew Israelite, as we pointed out earlier, Israel was a people. The ite in Israelite, that ite is a suffix. All right. So then you have Hebrew Israelite. To be quite candid, my first teacher, who was the student of Rabbi Yirmiyahu, who was the student of Rabbi Matthew, my first Israelite teacher was Mora Yosef, and he used to state that it was actually redundant to say Hebrew Israelite. Not that is wicked, not that is off, not that is something to be bamboozled about, but more so a matter of it's unnecessary. I am a grown male. I'm a man. It's the same point, kind of premise. So just want to point that out for reasonable purposes. All right. If we go on into the next slide, now this point here says the book written by L. Rappaport and that of Root of Windsor. Root of Windsor wrote that, and Rappaport wrote this book here called The Lost Jews, Last of the Ethiopian Philosophers. I meant for both slides to coincide, but I set it up like this in that way. This book from Babylon and Timbuktu is cited in the book that I wrote here. It's cited in the book that I wrote here. It's cited in the book that I wrote here. What am I saying by giving acknowledgement and may the Most High continue to bless the life of Root of Windsor? Israelite authors of today more than likely would not exist had it not been for him breaking the door or the barrier for Israelites to become authors. I first heard of the book from Babylon and Timbuktu when I was 8 years old. I'm now 42, thank the Most High. So 34, round off, say maybe 35 years ago, is when I first personally heard about the book from Babylon and Timbuktu. It was originally written in 1969, 1968, and hardcover version. And as you know, versions of it began to go from one step to the next to the next. We cannot emphasize as Israelites the significant work that Root of Windsor has made for the Israelite community in a matter of authorship. He also wrote another book. See if it's on the shelf here. No, actually, I'm going to show this right here. All right, let's look at this here. This here is my copy of the book from Babylon and Timbuktu. Now, there's two explanations for this. Either a brother was reading hard body or somebody wasn't taking care of their own book. But I've had this book since 1995, thank the Most High, and wanted to show that, yeah, a brother did go in and read to where the cover is off. Not saying that's the best way, but wanted to give acknowledgement to our predecessors, our elders, they who set in the tone for such. Comedians do it. When you find people giving props to Bill Cosby, Richard Pryor, and others, well, we authors in the house of Israel, we teachers in the house of Israel, give respect to the people who set the tone for us. Now, let's look at this here. And then I'm going to go back and ask the brother if he cared to say on this. Operation Solomon. In the late 1980s, as its history begins, the dark-skinned Jews of Ethiopia yearned to go home to Jerusalem. They called themselves the Beta Yisrael, the house of Israel, and they believed that the Holy Land was the birthplace of their ancestors. Their priests declared that God was calling them to Zoan after a sojourn in Ethiopia that has spanned millennia. Millennia meaning of thousands of years, hundreds into thousands. So, brothers and sisters, when we begin to look at this here, Operation Solomon, it's something that was done back in 1984 when they airlifted, according to this, over 14,000, you may see it right here, over 14,300 Ethiopian Jews to Israel. All right. Operation Moses was in 1984. Then you had Operation Solomon 1991. Sorry. And the book that you see there on the left-hand side is a book that I saw um when I was inside of, and it's not to sound arrogant or haughty or anything of that sort. There was an Israelite party that was going on out in Brooklyn back in like 1998. And the man and the wife who was hosting the party had a bookshelf. Now, not being funny, those who know a brother, that's where I'm going, the bookshelf. And so I looked to sit there and see what books, I'm not going to lie, I can borrow. No, I'm not stealing, brothers and sisters. What books can I ask to borrow? They told me only one, granted, and that's the one that I borrowed. And then I returned it after getting my own and so forth. And in that book there, The Lord's Jews, Last of the Ethiopian Philosophes, as you see there, they're showing the children there on the cover. There is no way while people who endorsed the 12 tribe chart, while not acknowledging the Israelites that was in Ethiopia, when the book of Isaiah, which we're going to get into in a second, speaks about Israel in Cush, which is Ethiopia. While we just pointed out before that the guy Adisu Musala of the so-called Falasha community, who call themselves Beta Yisrael, he said his people thought that, quote, all the Jews in the world were black, and that the Sabbatean River, Sambot, Sambotyon, or the Sambotyan River, which is what they're saying holds the key to where the lost tribes of Israel are. It says some of the lost tribes of Israel are in America. So here's can we put one to another. If they're saying, as pointed out, that they believed, quote, all the Jews in the world were black, as pointed out in the Jerusalem Chronicle article cited in this book here, I'm going to show this again. This book here is called From Assyria to America. All right, I'm going to show what I'm talking about, say in here again, if we will, brothers and sisters, right? In 1996, the Jerusalem Chronicle, which is based out of Mississippi, spoke about this guy in an interview, and he said that we thought all the Jews in the world were black. So if they're saying that some of the tribes of Israel are in America, what are they talking about? When they were first, quote unquote, discovered, for the lack of a better term, in the 1670s by the Portuguese who tried to bring Christianity there, they were rejected and declined. The Beta Yisrael was not feeling the matter of Christianity, for the lack of a better term. What we call the Torah in Hebrew, they call the Orit. You understand? And so, while some Israelites say that there's no way that they could be Israelites in Ethiopia, what you have, and I say this in no disrespect intended, ignored is what Isaiah chapter 11 says, and put in many cases a chart that was made in the 1960s or the 1970s. Some people say the 60s, some people say the 70s, and have put it over the word of the Most High, which is in the book of Isaiah, which dates back, brothers and sisters, to the 8th century BCE. And there's no way that they can have, according to a guy named, forgot his name, Leslie Wolof. He wrote a book called Falasha Anthology. And in that book, Falasha Anthology, it goes over the calendar. Saturday, quote unquote, Saturday being the Shabbat. How did these people who do not have the Mormon Bible, the King James Version Bible, or even the Masoretic text of the Tanakh, how did these people know of the days that we see in Leviticus, the 23rd chapter? How were they shown not speaking English, but speaking Amharic, saying prayers that are identical to that of Solomon? Why are they talking about Solomon? According to some, Solomon, king of Israel, had a child with a woman who was the queen of Ethiopia. And they had a son, according to some, named Menelik. Some Israelites, and I say no disrespect, dealing with the chart, will say, no, that couldn't have been because Rehoboam was the son that took the throne. Otherwise, the scriptures would have said it. Brothers and sisters, Solomon had 700 wives, 300 concubines. If we think, as grown men, that he only had Tafat, another daughter, and Rehoboam, mentioned in Kings and Chronicles, then we're mistaken. It says in the book of Kings that Solomon gave the queen of Sheba kol kafesa, all her desire. What will stop that matter happening when Solomon already had ships that was going to Tarshish, which is Spain, to trade in animals and everything of that sort? Israel is bigger, and I hate to have to say it in such blunt terms. Israel is bigger than the camps that we see today. No dishonor to any of my teachers. And we already know that 2/3 of Israel is not going to make it. So when people begin to talk about, my camp and my congregation and quote my people and quote we've been around since X, Y, and Z date. I hate to have to say this. We can only hope that we are part of that remnant. We don't want it to be a thing where Leviticus chapter 13 talks about the old leprosy. And heaven forbid, some of us are already part of that 1/3. While that person in Leviticus 13 may not know he or she has the old leprosy it talks about in there. Meanwhile, we're doing things not already acknowledging that some of us is already cut off. It's about study and humility. So I just wanted to point that out. So I'm going to relinquish the mic. No, all right. It said Jerusalem Chronicle newspaper is located in Memphis. No, it was, correct me if I'm wrong, started in Mississippi. Where it's at now, I understand it to be in Tennessee. But I remember seeing the Jerusalem Chronicle paper and it said publication in Mississippi. I remember that when I was a child. I know the current one is operated by they in Tennessee. I respect that. So I'm going to at this point relinquish um the mic in case if the brother wants to say something as we build back and forth with each other upon this particular subject. All right, Toda for that.
All right, the Beta Israel. The Beta Israel is one of my most favorite subjects because I love, Ethiopian culture, cuisine, all this and that. Because Ethiopian culture, even though you got half of the population that may be Eastern Orthodox Christian, so to speak, and then you got the other half Islamic, and then you have us in between, in there and other groups or what have you. However, as the history, some of the history goes, they, escaped. They traveled down through Sudan or what have you, and ended up in the borders of Ethiopia, and then they went up into the Simeon Mountains. And they used to have a kingdom there that's known as the Kingdom of the Gideons. And we know that, according to our text, that Gideon was a warrior. So they called their kings Gideons or Gideons. So up there in the Simeon Mountains, then they have like up in this territory called a Galmeter, and that's where you will find a lot of the Beta Israel back in the day. Now you have plenty of them that are sparsely populated in like the capital city Addis Ababa, in other places, Gondar, and other places. But their story is that they ended up, they have stories of, King Solomon, Queen Sheba. They ended up there because they say that the Queen of Sheba, she ended up pregnant and went back to Ethiopia. The Ethiopians call her Makda. So she ended up pregnant and she bore the son, and the son went back to Jerusalem to be educated by Solomon. So on his way back home to Ethiopia, he was sent back to Ethiopia with, if I'm not mistaken, about, I'm thinking between 30 men from each of the tribes of Israel, and he ended up taking the Ark of the Covenant. That's the story. And to this very day, they still claim to have the Ark of the Covenant, as they call it, the Tabot, in Ethiopia at some, what's the name of that church? The Church of St. Mary. And I believe it's in Aksum, Ethiopia. However, these Israelites, these Hebrews, these Jews, they ended up having to basically fight off the, onslaughts of Christianity, the Portuguese, the Ethiopian Christians, because you had the kings like Negus Seyon or whoever tried to take over their territory, and just so that they can convert them to Christianity. Um, However, they were eventually defeated, but they were known to be a formidable force of warriors, and they protected themselves very well. They lasted for a long time. They defeated their Christian enemies, but then they were eventually defeated. However, their story, I don't see how we can deny their being Israelites. They blended in with the population. Of course, they married, their women, and some of their, men may have married our women, but they went along with the Beth Israel side. Um, Another thing is that when you look at Ethiopian culture as a whole, as I mentioned before, you can see Orit or Torah being practiced in the culture. However, Aki, I'm giving it to you.
Okay, thank you for that, my brother. All right, we're going to continue on going back and forth, as the saying goes, bouncing off of each other regarding this particular matter. All right, let's go in, if we will, and look at this citation from the book I wrote. The fundamental reason many Israelites deny the reality of the said falasha as Israelites is based on two reasons. One, the said falashas do not believe in Jesus. When they get literature, they survey it to see if, quote, Christ is mentioned in it. If so, it is disregarded. They who leave their community and embrace Christianity are excommunicated. So you have the people that the Hamites or the Cushites call falasha. They know that the Beta Israel is not part of their people, like say the Agors or the Suri. They refer to the Israelites as Falasha. The word Falasha means landless or strangers, right? They who drink blood in the morning call the house of Israel strangers in Ethiopia. Yisrael don't drink blood. So this is something we want to point out. It says they claim in part to be of the tribe of Dan. Now I say that in part because there was actually a Sephardic rabbi in 1975 that said, "Oh, this is the Lord's tribe of Dan." All of them don't claim such of Dan. Since the standard 12 tribe chart does not have the tribe of Dan, and since the standard 12 tribe chart has mainly people from the Western Hemisphere, they from Ethiopia do not fit the said chart. So again, we want to point out that there's no way that the land of Israel is located where it's at because we know it's not in the Western Hemisphere, like some have said, right? You have it to where Israelites are saying that a group of over 15, 16, 20,000 said people are not Israelites, but don't give an answer on how they knew the customs and the culture of Israel. That means even if one want to say those guys, those elders, those youth are not Israelites, Israel had to be there in order for them to know the culture that hard. In order for them to know that much about it, to understand the day such as Shemini Azeret, the 8th day solemn assembly, which is the last day of the Hebrew Israelite, pardon me, the last day of the Hebrew calendar outside of the moon and Shabbat for holy days. That means Israel had to be there. So that's something we want to point out for reasonable purposes. Again, because it don't fit the 12 tribe standard chart, because the Beta Yisrael excommunicates people, and I don't mean to get too personal, before my mother passed away, she had a home health aide. Her home health aide was what you would call in their time Falash Morah. Falash Morah. Those are the ones that left from the Orit or the Torah, the ways of the said quote unquote Old Testament, and decided to adopt Christianity along that, and that community kicks them out. That family was part of it. That wound up becoming a home health aide for my imam, my mother. So Just want to point that out. So while we know good and well that many Israelites in the Western Hemisphere are by their own declaration messianic, and while they call others Old Testament based or Torah based, the scary part is when somebody says, oh, they're Yah only. If you're not about only Yah, then what are you about? If you're not based on, when you say someone is Torah based, if your base is not on what Yah gave to Moses, then what is your base and foundation on? Because Deuteronomy 28 is in the Old Testament, it's in the Torah. I want to read part of it in this case here, Deuteronomy, the 28th chapter. And we want to look at it from this point here. And it says this. We are in Deuteronomy 28, verse 58. If thou wilt not observe to do all the words of this law that are written in this book, that thou mayest fear this glorious and fearful name, Yah Elohim. Deuteronomy 28, sorry for throwing it as such. Deuteronomy 28, verse 58 says, all the words that are in this book. If it's not based on that book, which is the Torah, all the words, but Sefer HaTorah Hazot, the book of this law, not a part B law, not a future doctrine to come along later, but when the Torah was completed, Joshua the son of Nun only had the books of Moses. That is the Torah. So if that is not your base, and why you're calling other Israelites Yah only, who are you only about? That's scary, for the lack of a better term. And like I stating, is not to be disrespectful or offensive to anybody. All right. So we're gonna go on to the next slide. The Lost Tribes of Israel book in the author. The Lost Tribes of Israel, A History of a Myth by Tudor Parfit. Now, this is a French dude, correct me if I'm wrong, that attempts to go throughout the length and breadth of the earth as much as he can to sit there and talk about the tribes of Israel here and the tribes of Israel there. He spoke about the tribes of Israel in Western Africa. And this is when it says line upon line and precept upon precept. And it says, the prudent man looketh well to his going. Proverbs by Solomon, that we've been talking about Solomon. It speaks upon the prudent man looking well to his going. In that book there, which I do have a copy of, when it says the Lost Tribes of Israel by Tudor Parfit, right? He said that the said African American understood themselves as being Israelites by giving a Bible from the slave master. But at the same token, he says that the Igbo are part of the house of Israel. So taking just that statement that the Igbo that you see in Nigeria are part of the house of Israel, and it said African American, who in part come from Igbo, such as they in Georgia, such as they in Jamaica, as we went over before on the channel about Daddy Sharp in the Igbo uprising that was done in Jamaica. So, brothers and sisters, the guy who says that the said African American learned it by reading the Bible given by the slave master, how then did the Igbo learn it? And many of them don't speak English. How does the Beta Yisrael know it? And they don't speak English. What we know and understand in Ezekiel is that the Most High said, according to Israel's ways and according to their doings, did he do unto the house of Israel. Perhaps we in the West in the ancient days, by default, were they who were really going against the commandments of the Most High extremely heavy. You know, the kind of stuff that the brother Maury Yiftach on his channel, subscribe to it, Shomrei Habrit, went over and talked about this iniquity, that abomination, and so forth. So just want to go over that. With his book, what I'm going to say here, Tudor Parfit book, is like many Israelites do, even with one another. Take the meat, get rid of other matters. And by that, we mean the clean meat. Let's go on to the next slide. My Hebrew teacher, Kohen Mikael, in his book. I met my Hebrew teacher initially when I was 12 years old. It's an honor for me to show my teacher in his work. Because you have said moray, or I'm a moray, and so forth and so on, but they don't never want to show who paved the way for them, be they have met them or not. I have that book, Israelites and Jews, The Significant Difference. I now, thinking the Most High, age 42, I had that book since I was, brothers and sisters, 17 years old. It's a good book. It has a whole lot of good information about Edom, the mixture with Romans, what happened with Japhet. He talks about the Beta Yisrael in there, and so forth and so on. And what I understand is the community that's in Dimona, they try to separate them. The Israeli government tries to keep the Beta Yisrael that was airlifted to the place called Haifa of today, and those in Dimona in southern Israel. They try to sit there and keep them separated. But the Most High is going to bring his people together. One of the things we want to point out is that, and it's not trying to be funny or anything of that sort, but 1 second. When you see, brothers and sisters, the following Hebrew books. Hebrew is easy, or pardon me, Hebrew for couples 1, Hebrew for couples 2, Hebrew for couples 3, Hebrew is easy, volume 1, Hebrew is easy, volume 2, Hebrew is easy, volume 3, Hebrew is easy, volume 4, Hebrew is easy, volume 5, which was the hardest one for me to write, and Hebrew is easy, volume 6. These 9 books, the first 3 being by me, my lady, the sister Sarai, as you see here, us pictured. And these 6 brothers and sisters, the last one in honor of my mother, may she rest in peace, would not have been into fruition if not on a human level and on the deeper level of the Most High by having Kohen Mikael as my teacher. When we were in the Kitasika classes in the congregation called Hashaba Yisrael in New York, every so-called Tuesday, Yom Shalishi, we went over it and over it and over it and over it and the repetition and over it. Because by the way, the book Deuteronomy means repetition, by the way. So with Yisrael, yeah, we again, Ani, Ata, At, Hu, He, Anaknu, Atem, Atem, Haim, Haim. So Hebrew became easy. Thus I named it as such. And so I just wanted to point that out for reference purposes. He wrote a history book that you see there as well. For those who are interested, they can get it. I acknowledge my teachers. May the Most High continue to bless their life. Anybody who doesn't acknowledge their teachers needs to have a seat. I'm going to relinquish the mic and I'm going to pass it off to the brother Mordech Hanok in case he want to go over the couple of slides we went over and expound upon it. Thank you for that.
All right. So I just want to point out the locations, like in Isaiah 11 through 12, of those 10 lost tribes, in case nobody really knows, in our contemporary times. So we have Assyria, which is basically an ancient kingdom that ruled over parts of Iraq, Iran, Kuwait, Syria, and Turkey. Okay. Then we have Pathros, which was in Upper Egypt, primarily what they called the region Lebaid. And that region was a region in ancient Egypt comprising of 13 southernmost nomes or territories under the control of a governor. And it extended from Elephantine all the way up to modern Asyut, north of Thebes. Then we have Elam, which is an ancient country in southern Iran. Then we have Shinar, which is known as Mesopotamia, Sumer, Babylonia, or Iraq. Then we have Hamath, which is in Syria, on the banks of the Orontos River in west central Syria. However, knowing the locations of the 10 lost tribes, you can look it up. You can look up these countries, their modern names, and then you can look up the peoples there. And more than likely, you're going to have to point out, like, when you search for them, Afro or African people in those regions, and you'll find us in those countries that I just named from Isaiah 11 through 12. But as far as giving honor to your, recognition to your teachers, that's very important. My teacher was a man named Chris. It was a very small community in Illinois. That's who my father started me out with. So he taught me plenty of things. But even though at that time they were going by both books, but they didn't recognize the main character of the New Testament. But that's all I got to say about that part. Bet to Israel, we covered that. Moses Farrar, I don't have this book, but I have his other book, The Hebrew Heritage of Black Africa. That's a very, very good book. And Israelites and Jews, A Significant Difference, that's a good one too. Also, there's another book that I have, The Separation Between the Truths and Lies of the Bible by Kohen Mikhail Ben Levi. That's a very good book as well. And, as the Moray said, we're not bashing anybody. We're not trying to offend anybody. We're just sharing information. If you're truly seeking the truth, you will delve into things that will test what you already believe in, especially when it comes to our foundation, which is the Hebrew Bible or the Torah, Tanakh, Mikra, or what have you. That's the foundation. There is nothing wrong with being Yah only, because that's what Yah wants to be anyway, Yah only. All these other additions are nothing more than distractions. Just like Yah says, he has given us the blessing and the curse. Which one you choose, whichever one you choose is going to determine your destiny. It's going to determine your outcome. If you want to be on the right side of our Creator, choose life, which he's mentioned in the Hebrew Bible. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Cain, thank you for that, my brother. Giving honor and praise unto the Most High, the creator and the maker of heaven and earth. I met the elder Moses Farrar in New York when he was at a book signing in 2004, the same year that my very first teacher, my mother, passed away. And I state that to state that Israel has to carry the baton. When we speak about our teachers and our elders, they're elders, even if they're not elderly. We can't let it drop in that particular realm. The understanding and concept of there being a oral teaching and things don't need to be written, that's not Israelitish, for the lack of a better word. It says you're supposed to write the law on your doorposts. it says that Isaiah took faithful scribes to record what he stated. When Daniel fainted, the angel picked him up and said, record what I'm telling you, for it will belong to many days to come. When Vespasian, then later on his son Titus, and then Vespasian's other son Domitian attempted to destroy all the records of the Israelites in the first century AD or the first century CE, you best believe we need to write more books, because they tried to make sure that one, the records of the Israelites are destroyed. The Apocrypha, as pointed out in the book of Maccabees, the Greeks already put their images in our book. So it comes to a point like the Philistines putting their lords on the Ark of the Covenant, the Greeks putting their stuff into our book. We got to know our book. Okay, take that part. That's not that. That's not what Moses taught. Next, that's not what nope. You know why that becomes important? Because just like Moses Farrar pointed out in this book, which I had, and I only say that because I move from place to place, and you know, when moving, things get lost and so forth. So that's what happened with me in that particular book by Moses Farrar. He reproduced or republished the book Hebrew Heritage of Black Africa, that was done by an actual European Jew named Stephen Jacobs. Stephen Jacobs was a white man, a European Jew, who said very directly that the black man in America is the true Israelite, and that he, a white man, and the white Jews are practicing a religion that belongs to, for the lack of a better term, the black people. He said that in his book called Hebrew Heritage of Black Africa. Moses Farrar, knowing and having permission, took those same writings, and you can see it on Amazon of today. So these are things, brothers and sisters, that we just want to point out for edification purposes. Support the authors. Get the books. Support the authors. Get the books, brothers and sisters. All right. Now, those who've been following the channel, you might see this being a little different than a Shabbat presentation, because I'm not going to endorse somebody to buy things on the Shabbat. Like yesterday when I did the Hebrew class or the Torah class or so forth and so on, but not trying to play salesman. It's not the Shabbat. Endorse, promote your authors, your historians. Everybody else does it. They made sure when I was in the 10th grade that I heard about the diary of Anne Frank, a woman who actually was a girl at the time, who was kept up inside of the roof of an attic or something like that. And she wrote things about her day-to-day time during the Holocaust that went on in Europe. So why will we not want to support our authors? If the book isn't for you, give it to somebody who you think it may be for as a gift. Amazon even asks you, is this a gift? And they'll send it as such. So I just want to point that out for a reason purposes, brothers and sisters. All right. May the Most High continue to bless the life of Moses Farrar, Kohen Mikael, and we're going to move on into this. Eric Frazier, in a statement regarding Gabriel Prosser, what we just showed is a few people who have put out literature regarding the Israelites, the house of Israel, and the identity of such. The understanding of saying, quote, black people, in this case, African Americans, are part of the Israelite people goes back to and maybe before the matter of slavery in the 19th century. Let's look at this citation here. It appears from scanty information available that the Bible was used to impress the Negroes that they, as the Israelites, could throw off the yoke of slavery and that God would come to their aid. In the Bible, in Ezekiel chapter 16, if we will. No, sorry. Ezekiel 11, verse 16. And we're going to correlate it with the statement that was made there. Let the book speak for itself. And it says this. Therefore say, thus saith the Lord God, although I have cast them far from among the heathen, and although I have scattered them among the countries, Yet will I be to them, meaning to the house of Israel, as a little sanctuary in the countries where they shall come. That's Ezekiel. Now, while the brother Mordecai Henok and I were speaking upon Moshe or Moses, let's see one of the last things that we see in the Torah in Deuteronomy chapter 30. And it says this, and it shall come to pass when all these things are come upon thee, O house of Israel, the blessing and the curse which I, Moses, set before thee. And thou shalt call them to mind among all the nations, whether Yah your power have driven thee. And thou shalt return unto Yah your power, and shalt obey his voice according to all that I command thee this day, thou and your children, with all your heart, with all your soul. So, brothers and sisters, don't let people tell you we in captivity, we can't sit there and keep the commandments, we in captivity, we can't do that outside of the land, because right here it says, in all the countries where Israel was scattered by the Most High. Leviticus 26 says that Israel is to pay for their forefathers' iniquities and their iniquities in the land of the enemies. And iniquity is equated to a sin. It's a transgression of the Most High's law. So if Leviticus 26 verse 40, you can read in your own time, says that Israel, while in the land of their enemies, will pay for their own iniquities, how can we teach while outside of the land we can't keep the law? That's why Daniel says, for instance, some will wake up to everlasting life and some will wake up to everlasting shame and contempt. Don't follow these, and I hate to have to put it in terms like that, these Facebook said teachers and scholars who refuse to acknowledge who taught him or her. Because everybody had a teacher somewhere. Even if the person just said, I got it from angel in a dream. The Most High sent that. So anyone who is portraying themselves as a teacher, an instructor, a counselor, and not acknowledging where he or she got their information from, as stated earlier, you need to have many seats. So now getting back into this portion here in Deuteronomy chapter 30, it distinctly says, as pointed out, brothers and sisters, that then the Most High, your King, Yah, your power, will turn your captivity and have compassion upon thee, and will return and gather thee from all the nations whither the Lord thy God has scattered thee. So don't let nobody tell you after reading Deuteronomy 30 and after reading Ezekiel 11 about the Most High being a little sanctuary in the countries where we've come to. So this knowledge of Israel and us waking up, like Isaiah chapter 22, I believe it's at, where it speaks about the noise in the valley, was intended to happen. There was no way that you was going to keep the people of the Most High sleeping but for so long. Don't think so. Let's go to Ezekiel chapter 39 and let the book speak for itself. All right. We are in the scriptures in Ezekiel chapter 39, and we're going to read in verse 21. All right. Thank you for the time. Thank you for joining on. Please like, comment, and share. All right. We are in the book of the prophet Ezekiel, chapter 39, verse 21. And let's see what it says here, because we want to get into this. I'm going to type this in the room. All right. Ezekiel 39, 21. Let's see what this portion here says. And I will set my glory among the heathen, and all the heathen shall see my judgment that I have executed, and my hand that I have laid upon them. That them is the house of Israel. In other words, what the Most High is saying, he's going to let the nation see what he's going to do to the house of Israel. So the house of Israel shall know that I am Yah, their power, from that day and forward. And the heathen shall know that the house of Israel went into captivity for their iniquity, because they trespassed against me. Therefore hid I my face from them and gave them into the hand of their enemies, so they fell all by the sword. According to their uncleanness and according to their transgressions have I done unto them, and hid my face from them. Therefore, thus saith the Lord God, now will I bring back the captivity of Jacob and have mercy upon the whole Beit Yisrael, the whole house of Israel, and I will be jealous for my holy name. After that they have borne their shame and all their trespasses whereby they have trespassed against me, when they dwelt safely in their land, and none made them afraid. When I had brought them from among the people and gathered them out of their enemies' lands, and am sanctified in them in the sight of many nations. Israel is that light. Let's go on. Then they shall know that I am Yah their power, the Lord their God, which caused them to be led into captivity among the heathen. But I have gathered them unto their own land, and have left none of them any more there. Neither will I hide my face any more from them, for I have poured out my spirit upon the house of Israel, saith the Most High. So Ezekiel chapter 39 in that portion is getting into the matter of why Israel went into captivity. When we start talking about the diaspora in the second Egypt of Deuteronomy 28:68 and things of that kind of nature, why do you think it was a crime for us to know how to read? Brothers and sisters, in this book here, giving honor to the Most High, I would like to read a particular portion out of this, if we will. And it goes into saying this. Thank you for that. Here we go. I want to read just this here in this book here. You can also get this on Amazon. All right. And I want to read part of it on page 242. By the Act of 1740, it was enacted as follows. Whereas the having of slaves taught to write, or suffering them to be employed in writing, must be attested with great inconveniences, be it enacted that all and every persons and every, it says, be it enacted that all and every persons and persons whatsoever who shall hereafter teach or cause any slave or slaves to be taught to write, or shall use or employ any slaves as scribe in any manner of writing, hereafter taught to write, every such person or person shall, for every such offense, forfeit the sum of 100 pounds current money. That, brothers and sisters, was part of the slave code that was in the United States. That if a slave is taught how to write, that you were a criminal for teaching such. And we know about us not knowing how to read. We were kept illiterate for a reason. So when you look at, say, for instance, the matter with Gabriel Prosser, brothers and sisters, we see right here. Gabriel's rebellion. On the 24th of August, 1800, slave Ben Woolfolk met with other slaves at nearly Little Page's Bridge to recruit individuals for an insurrection planned for August 30th. The insurgents, led by Gabriel, a slave owned by Thomas Henry Prosser of Henrico County, intended to march into Richmond, capture the governor, James Monroe, and force him and other leaders to support political, social, and economic equality. Intense rains delayed the scheme. Mosby Shepherd of Henrico County notified Monroe of the conspiracy after his slaves, Tom and Pharaoh, made him aware of the plot. Monroe called out the militia, who captured many of the alleged conspirators. Trials were held in a number of jurisdictions, including Caroline County, resulting in the execution of Gabriel and at least 25 supporters. Did you know that Gabriel Prosser was a person who knew how to read? And upon reading is where we get the statement that we see here that says, it appears from scanty information available that the Bible was used to impress the Negroes that they, as the Israelites, could throw off the yoke of slavery and God will come to their aid. They want to kill that one. Now, the guy who recorded that, Edward Fraser, is the person whom you see right here. This is why we want to cite our sources. So when we begin to sit back and think that publication is not important, reading is not important, presenting information is not important, we can see what happened with those who knew how to read and where it led them. They wanted to go out and free their people. You know, Moses gets respect for being the one who led the people out from slavery. Moses, whom the book of Malachi records as having the law of Moses. We can see why they called it in slavery the Old Testament. Shh! Don't tell them that's their book. They're going to do what Moses did. You see? They try to kill the prophets of the Most High by calling it Old Testament, just like they killed Gabriel Prosser. So I'm going to relinquish the mic, and while laying back and forth with the brother, see what the brother has to say about the some of the slides we just went over. Shalom.
Shalom, Aki. Well, I'm not very familiar with Gabriel Prosser. I've heard just a little bit about his story. I heard more about Nat Turner. It was pretty much the same thing. You know, we're the Israelites. It's time to handle this business and free ourselves. I don't have very much to say about it, but my mother used to tell me when I was younger and didn't want to read that if you want anything hidden from a black man, just put it in the book. You know, because she said that most don't like to read. So after some time, I finally got it and started. I'm gonna relinquish the mic.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that, my brother. Giving honor and praise unto the Most
Aki.
High. Let us continue. All right. Let us continue in this particular manner, if we will, while showing what we're talking about. All right. We already went over this with the matter with Gabriel Prosser. The 12 tribe chart matter, Judah, the so called Negroes, Benjamin, West Indians, Levi, Haitians, Simeon, Dominicans, Zebulun, Guatemala to Panama, Ephraim, Puerto Ricans, Manasseh, Cubans, Gad, North American Indians, Reuben, Seminole Indians, Naphtali, Argentina and Chile, Asher, Colombia to Uruguay, Issachar, Mexicans. All right, there's a couple of questions to ask concerning this, in no disrespect. Haiti is part of the West Indies. So to say Benjamin and West Indies, correct me if I'm wrong, what is called Haiti and the Dominican Republic, which was called Hispaniola back then in the day, right? Saying somebody wrote in Laban ben Yeshurun, Denmark Vesey launched a rebellion with the same understanding as Gabriel Prosser. Yes, he did. Gabriel Prosser was in Virginia. Thank you for that, my brother. Gabriel Prosser was in Virginia while Denmark Vesey was in South Carolina. You know, one of the interesting things Denmark Vesey stated, who knew how to read, like Gabriel Prosser, like Nat Turner as well, were literate. One of the things that he told the people when he was saying we should rebel against the enslavers, we're just slaves. What can we do? Gabriel, pardon me, Denmark Vesey, cited by the brother inside the chat there, Laban Ben Yeshurun. Do you know Denmark Vesey used to tell the people in South Carolina, and that's why you deserve to be a slave, because you just said you were. We're just slaves, and you deserve that. See, how can we take this back to the Old Testament, if we will? Let us get a leader and go back to Egypt. Moses, step aside, and I'm going to consume that evil congregation. You want to go back to being a slave in the wilderness of Sinai? You don't want to sit there and see the good that the Most High was giving you, O house of Israel, the land of Canaan, as described in Deuteronomy 6. How is it filled of all good things which you filled not? Deuteronomy 11, where it says that the rain of heaven, unlike the Nile of Egypt, overflowing for vegetation, you get rain coming down upon you. Your former rain and your latter rain that Deuteronomy talks about. The climate of Israel, the land, and the climate of Egypt is different. So now looking upon this, and now looking at this in this particular manner, brothers and sisters, like Denmark Vesey stated to the people, you deserve to be a slave if you say so. There was a saying that was said then in slavery: I'd rather be dead in my grave before I'll be a slave. Moses in the Old Testament, for the lack of a better term, the Old Testament, killed the slave master. Do we see why they do not want that to be the matter? Moses killed the slave master. He murdered, according to some. He didn't murder. He saw his brother being attacked and he defended his brother. When, for the lack of a better term, the sellout, you're going to kill me like you killed the Egyptian. Moses like, yeah, now I got to go. And when Moses fled is when the Most High met him. The Most High, the supreme intelligence of the universe. So we want to point this out, that there's a time and place for everything. It was a time for Moses to make that run and to be introduced to the Most High after he slew for his brother. I can't go, I'm a slow speech. Moses, you're going to go, you're going to tell the people what I'm telling you, and you're going to bring them that they may serve me. Shalak, I shall tishlak. Send whom you will send. Then it says, while you caught off Yahweh Moshe, and the anger of Yah was kindled against Moses, because you may not see your potential in your light. What some, sadly, in the fake book, Facebook world, meta world, online, who don't respect their teachers, who don't have no vision on how to get things accomplished, whatever your goal or your desire may be, whatever talent, whatever occupation that the Most High has you in. Anytime you find someone not doing their potential while talking about others, oh, you got ego and you're egotistical. No, everybody's not egotistical. You're just lazy. Everybody is not egotistical. Some people just don't have no motivation. So don't sit there and let someone not understand what ego truly is. Ego is from the Latin word I, like you speaking of self. Putting in work is not egotistical. Jeremiah in the Old Testament, for the lack of a better term, it says, cursed be he who doeth the work of the Most High with a slack hand. Jeremiah 48 verse 10. Cursed be he who doeth the work of the Most High with a slack hand. So if you have whatever your talent, gift, passion, occupation from the Most High, it said the name of the righteous is for a blessing. That's why we were showing the Mount Zion temple of the Israelites back then. Their name is for a blessing. The people, even in this day and time, who I don't know what to do. You see, the brother mentioned Denmark Vesey. Who were the people who said they were just slaves? What are their names? Their names ain't for a blessing. This is what we want to point out, brothers and sisters, for edification purposes. The ways of the God of the said Old Testament. When slavery was over, death happened. There was no treaty, even though we talk about the Lahul Papyrus and the Apura Papyrus. There was no treaty between Moses and Pharaoh. There was bring the people there, and I'm going to get me honor over the Egyptians. Because you know, the deeper you go into the water and it crashes upon you, there's death. You hurt my son, I'm going to take your son. We do eye for eye, not I slap you, you turn other cheek. That's not what the Most High told us to do. So we want to point this out for edification purposes. Why did they give you what's called the slave Bible, saying Joseph was brought in there, but don't show you the Exodus? Why is Moshe spoken about as if he's a character, or Moshe or Moses, like, oh yeah, and back in the day, say with Moses, Do you realize the kind of quality that this man was? And it's not to praise a man, it's to acknowledge your more, your teacher. But getting back, Will, with this chart, correct me if I'm wrong. The Seminole Indians were in Florida. They descend, not talking about the ones who joined on with them, escaping slavery into what they call Spanish Florida after a while. But we're talking about the Seminoles that descend from the people called the Creek. So by this chart, the Creek people, all right, and we want to put this in there, Creek. The Creek people are the ancestors of the Seminoles in Florida. So by default, that would be the tribe of Gad, according to this chart with the North American Indians. While not denying that there are indigenous people of this land or people that were in this land that are said to be native Indians, if you will, or Native Americans, because Israel was scattered from one end of the earth to the other. Because, like the Falasha, so called Falasha, keeping holy days, there are Native American tribes that keep the days of Leviticus 23. There were Native American tribes that was signing the book of Isaiah to the Europeans. The flower fadeth, but the word of our God is forever. That's in Isaiah chapter 40. There was a record of them in South America singing Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4 of the Shema Yisrael. Hear, O Israel, Yah, our power, Yah is one. That was dated back to the 1640s in South America. So these are just things we want to point out for reference purposes. But now, what seems to have happened is what this chart has caused, and there's no disrespect intended, is that like people hold up their Watchtower and Awake magazine as par with the Bible, so do Israelites hold this chart as par with the scriptures while missing a tribe of the tribe of Dan. So I'm going to relinquish the mic and let the brother speak upon this before we conclude this presentation. Thank you.
You hear me? Oh, there we go. Well, I just like to conclude that we should just discard the chart, discard the notions that all of these different peoples or what have you on this chart. All I know is that, like, as far as us being, it says that the 10 lost tribes will be scattered in those countries that are mentioned in Isaiah 11 through 12. But the house of Judah, or the tribes of Judah, Benjamin, Levi, whoever, are spread to the four corners of the earth. Um, I just say we just need to discard the chart, stick with the scripture, and just let it ride. I mean, we have to have a system, order, and structure. And this right here is not a good system of identification for anybody in the house of Israel, period. Some It just irks me personally because it totally disregard and doesn't acknowledge the other ones, as I had mentioned earlier. And uh, we could do better, with further research on the matter. Naphtali Asher. Yeah, that's all I have to say, really. You have to do further research and don't believe just anything that people tell you as far as um, as far as this chart is concerned. Just put it that way. All right, I relinquish the mic, Aki.
All right, my brother. Thank you for that. We're going to conclude in this. Thank you for your participation, Aki. We're going to conclude with this right here and just go over a particular matter. The division of the northern and southern kingdom was after Solomon's death. In the Bible, in First Kings chapter 12, I'm not going to mention the verses because sometimes, no disrespect intended, Israelites say, what verse? No, read the chapter. Take some time, take about a good 10 minutes and read the entire chapter. So I'm going to deliberately not mention what verse it's at, but it is in the book of First Kings chapter 12, where it says that Rehoboam, who was the son of Solomon, ruled over the people of Israel that lived in Judah. That tells you in First Kings chapter 12 that there were Israelites that would be of the northern tribes that were living in Judah. After Rehoboam, Abijah, Asa, Jehoshaphat, Jehoram, Jehoash, Amaziah, Uzziah, Jotam, Ahaz, Hezekiah, Manasseh. Okay, now here we go. During the era of Jehoram, the people of Edom that was under the hegemony of Israel rebelled, same as Moab. All of the nations that King David had conquered during the era later on of Jehoram, over 200 years later, was able to become free. This takes you back to the portion that Isaac gave to Esau, his son, when it says, you shall break his yoke off your neck when Jacob goes astray. Now, getting back to the point of the division of the kingdom, you had in the northern kingdom 20 kings from Jeroboam, Nadab, Baasha, Elah, Zimri, Timri, Omri, Ahab, and so forth. Ahab, we already went over, spoke about the matter of Israel mixing in with the Zidonians politically and otherwise, and how you get Israelites in what we call Carthage or Tunisia back then, which was already discussed on the presentation and inside the book that you see right here for those interested. All right. So now, brothers and sisters, looking at it, if we will, Israel was caught in a melee between Egypt trying to help the Babylonians, pardon me, trying to help the Assyrians against the Babylonians. When the northern kingdom of Israel fell, remember it said that in 2 Kings 17 that Hoshea has sent messages to quote, So the king of Egypt. So king of Egypt in 2 Kings is the Ethiopian Cushite that was ruling in Egypt's 25th dynasty. Now, Ezekiel later on says that Egypt was as a nail or so forth. When you lean upon it, the reed, it breaks and it sticks you. So Egypt was not a reliable help for the house of Israel or Judah. So now, Egypt's 25th dynasty was brought down in part by the Assyrians. Sennacherib, Shalmaneser, Ashurbanipal, Ashurnibal. Those Assyrian kings and what they refer to as the Neo-Assyrian Empire were partly the reason why Egypt fell as a kingdom. Israel was caught in the mix of that. Then you have brothers and sisters for reasonable purposes. The Babylonians defeating the Assyrians. So let us let the book speak upon how all of this correlates and what we're talking about. In the scriptures in Jeremiah chapter 50, in closing this presentation out, right? Jeremiah chapter 50, and we're going to read in verse 33. Jeremiah 50:33 says this: Thus saith the Lord of hosts, the children of Israel and the children of Judah were oppressed together, and all that took them captives held them fast. They refused to let them go. Jeremiah chapter 50, verse 17 says this: Israel is a scattered sheep. The lions have driven him away. First, the king of Assyria hath devoured him, and last is Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had broken his bones. So now Nebuchadnezzar is the son of Nabopolassar, which started the 11th dynasty of Babylon, as gone over in this channel and so forth. So Israel and Judah were oppressed by, according to Jeremiah chapter 50, by both the Assyrians and the Babylonians. Then, after Babylon fell to, brothers and sisters, the Medes and the Persians, because by the time Israel came in contact with them, the Medes were already subjugated by the Persians. That's why you read about Medo-Persia in the book of Daniel ever so often. That's why timeline and chronology helps once it comes down into that particular case. By the time the Israelites meet up with the Persians, they had already conquered the Medes. So now, Babylon falls to the Persian Empire. Egypt already done fell to the Assyrians. Necho, after slaying Josiah of Judah, that you see in the book of 2 Kings 23. What happens to Israel and Judah after that? Where are they to go? Where are the tribes of Israel to go? Because they carried Jeremiah into Egypt. As the brother Moreh Hanok spoke about, there's a story of them carrying the Ark of the Covenant into Ethiopia. So why will the bulk then of the people go to Europe? If they're bringing their prophets into Egypt, which is in Northeast Africa, if they're bringing their artifacts, like the Ark of the Covenant, into Eastern Africa, where do you think by default the people will go while they're carrying a prophet there? And in Jeremiah 44 and 43, they actually get kind of in a human way on Jeremiah's case, like, okay, prophet, tell us what to do now. You was a prophet back in Jerusalem, now tell us what to do here in Egypt. And so me and my lady have been in Egypt. One of the reasons why I respect the fact in going is because I wanted to see where our ancestors traveled through in certain cases. So, looking at that, brothers and sisters, for reasonable purposes, for edification matters, you cannot biblically prove this chart. It was an idea. It's not saying that there were no Israelites in the Western Hemisphere prior to, and I hate to have to say this, the Jesus of Lubeck ship, which was owned by John Hawkins, who worked for Elizabeth of England. Brothers and sisters, in closing out, the diaspora of Israel will be gathered by the Most High to make a chart while disregarding many of the prophecies in the scriptures is saying, like Ezekiel 13 says, the prophets have spoken a vain vision and have seen something that was not delivered to them. With that, giving honor and praise unto Yah, the creator and the maker of heaven and earth. All right. We're going to conclude in this particular case on the channel, brothers and sisters, Moreh Yeshiah Hebrew lessons. We intend to go over a Hebrew class to discuss things that we didn't discuss yesterday. All right. I give due benevolence and respect on the human level, as noted to my teachers. You can check the description when this is uploaded for all of the books that we cited in it. All right. And all of those books are available online. So a shout out to my brother, More Kanok. Shout out to the brother, Azariyahu Malaki. Shout out to Sotai, Live Lovingly. Shout out to Bathsheba. Shout out to Laban Ben Yeshurun. Shout out to Niger Congo Hebrew Israelites. Yes, Baruch Hashem. And shout out to Redemption. We are going to ask people to subscribe to the channel. And again, you can reach us by email and check the description when this is uploaded for more information concerning the books that was mentioned, how to acquire it, and so forth and so on. So I close out saying shalom. Most I bless you. Shalom. More Kanok, if you care to say anything else, let me know. And we shall conclude right after that and close down the video.
Yes, I appreciate you. I appreciate you, your channel, and for inviting me here. Yeah, it's great, and I have nothing else further to say. It's been fun. It's been fun and informative. One thing about it is, no matter how much one knows, you can always learn from someone else. No matter what. And thank you.